of missing out. Yeah, it's real, but I'm glad somebody caught it because it is a fascinating part of the desert Southwest.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, I pulled the radar. From the north to the south, and what happens in these situations? And so it'll shoot out of the lived in a more kind of tropical climate, like say in the southeast or something, and you've got a very hot, humid day, and you got some thunderstorms around. All of a sudden, you that form this little boundary, and it picks up. And there's a lot of dust down there that is definitely going to pick up some dust. Out in parts of the west, Utah, Washington, Colorado, even parts of Nevada. Kind of an interesting phenomenon, isn't it?
It is. They're much higher base. The bottom of them, the base, is higher up. And so you can get a little bit of rain. Usually it's virga. But you still have that process going on within the cloud structure that gives us lightning. And the lightning, by the way, that's what started the Dragon Bravo fire, was a lightning strike on July 4th, north rim of the Grand Canyon. Need a little bit more moisture to get these things to really start raining. Dry thunderstorms, it's a real thing out west. I lived in Las Vegas for 3 years in my high school days, and I remember those well. Now I get to go out from time to time and study them with all kinds of advanced equipment. But again, it's all about timing. I was talking with Chris about that on social media. You got to be out there for probably 2 or 3 weeks to really make sure you're going to see something, especially when the monsoon is hit and miss like it is this year.
Yeah, these dry thunderstorms, it's a fascinating phenomenon. Now, this is actually some video of what we call virga, which is rain that's falling out of the cloud, but it evaporates before it hits the ground because the surface is dry. And I actually pulled a little bit of data here. When you look at the current dew points, basically the amount of moisture that's around in this part of the country at the surface, it's very, very dry there. Now you go up to the mid-levels, about 15,000 feet or so, and you look at the humidity levels, and look at this. I mean, it's just perfectly stacked for the dry thunderstorms. You got to have moisture aloft and very dry air down at the surface, and it could not be a better setup for that. And in addition to that, you got dry fuels. You know, we got the drought going on, et cetera, et cetera. Mark, you got any plans for Aaron? Real quick, we're less than a minute.
Yeah, we're going to watch and see what it does over the coming days. That rip current threat is going to increase for the East Coast, and that's going to be more and more prevalent as we go through the next few days. Again, the weekend's going to be really good, so if you're heading to the beach this weekend, while there's always the threat of rip currents, they're not going to be from Aaron probably until later next week, and we will be on top of that. More than likely somewhere from eastern North Carolina.
Good stuff, as always. Mark Suddup, the exclusive Fox Weather Storm Tracker. Always a pleasure to talk to you, my friend. We'll have you back on soon.
Great to see you, Ari. Thanks.
All right, look at these time lapses here. This is out of Texas. Oh man, just rain falling like crazy out of those storms. It's like it's bursting. You get these little bursts of rain on and off. Great shot there. You always pick the good ones, Chris. I appreciate it. All right, you got any questions? Ask us. You got the
unprecedented, or was it a known threat?
Well, the Helene flood was worse than any in the history of Asheville, but history should have told us that it could have happened.
While Helene was forming in the Caribbean, over a foot of rain was falling in the mountains of North Carolina. Then Hurricane Helene itself brought another foot on top of the saturated soil. In 1916, 2 tropical systems in a week converged on Asheville. The scenario was similar to Helene, and the results were devastating as well. Asheville and the surrounding areas suffered tremendous flooding.
History tells us that mountain valleys are dangerous places if just the wrong tropical weather pattern comes together.
Fox Weather has you covered this hurricane season. Find out how to stream us free at foxweather.tv.
Welcome back to Fox Weather at Night. I'm meteorologist Ari Sarsalari. Don't forget, here at Fox Weather, we are your hurricane HQ. We know hurricanes very well, got some of the best experts in the business, and things are getting active in the Atlantic, to say the least. Obviously, we've been talking about Aaron over the last couple of days, and it's still out there looking very, very healthy tonight. Look at that infrared satellite imagery. This is a sign of a very healthy storm. Anytime you see these little spider legs, I don't know what you want to call it. I've been calling them striations, but that is just something you almost always see in a storm that's strengthening, especially early on in its life, and actually later on in its life too as it gets stronger. It's just an indication that the storm is breathing well, and the more efficiently it's breathing, the more efficiently it's ventilating itself, the more well put together it is. The other thing I'm looking at here with the satellite imagery is look how persistent the thunderstorms are in here. This is the morning on Thursday, and look at this, just this core of the tops of all the updrafts of all these thunderstorms. They're very well put together. Now, you don't see an eye feature yet. We still have a little bit of separation between the mid-levels of the storm and the low levels of the storm where the circulations are. At least that's what the hurricane hunters were finding. They were still a little bit separated, and the low-level circulation is still a little bit on the northeast side of the storm. But I can almost guarantee you that at some point over the next couple of days, we are going to see a well-defined eye on this storm because it's forecast to become a major hurricane, Category 3, possibly even Category 4. Now, is it forecast to hit land directly? No, at least right now, and I feel pretty confident about it at this point. The forecast models all in pretty solid agreement, or at least almost all in solid agreement, that this is going to make the recurve off toward the north. We know there's going to be a turn toward the north. There's no question about that. The only question that's left really in the forecast, I would say, is how close to the east coast does this get? It's not likely to make a direct landfall. It will have some impacts, that's for sure. I think if it continues along the southerly track initially and then ends up a little bit farther toward the west, could be a pretty big deal, especially in coastal parts of the Carolinas there. But if it wants to go a little bit farther out to sea, then yes, you're still going to have impacts, the big rip currents, the high waves, the high surf, etc. So that's really the question that's left in the forecast here. How far off the shore does that low end up? But that's something we'll watch very closely. The forecast models starting to come into agreement that there's not going to be a direct landfall, so I don't want to worry people too much about this. Oh, we're going to take some questions. Let's do it. That's a QR code that you can scan if you want to ask us any questions, and it just popped up on the map there once again. All right, let's see what you got, Chris. Hit me. This is from Michael Rupp in Conway. Is this hurricane season above or below average for activity? Oh, yeah, this was the one that I couldn't answer earlier because I didn't know the answer to it, and actually I could not find a graphic on it. But for overall activity in the Atlantic basin, we're actually a little bit below average up until this point in the year. Yeah, so we use this thing called ACE, Accumulated Cyclone Energy, and it just basically takes into account the strength, the combined strength of all the storms that have happened in the Atlantic basin so far this season. So any storms that have happened out here, down in the Caribbean, down in the Gulf, etc. And we're actually a little bit below average so far, but you know, don't let that give you a false sense of security, because I think the second half of the season is probably going to be pretty active. Okay, what's next? Gina in Orlando. When was the last time a hurricane dramatically changed course? Oh, I've covered a lot of hurricanes in my career. I'm trying to think. Okay, well, we had Idalia. That's the first one that comes to mind. It wasn't a crazy jog, but for some reason that does, it sparks something in my brain. I remember this one was supposed to come into Tallahassee. Supposed to be kind of a direct hit on Tallahassee, and at the last minute, it did a little bit of a jog to the east. Oops, let me go back to the other graphic there. There we go. give you a little lay of the land here. So I remember the forecasts initially were for this to come into Tallahassee, but it actually came into Fort Keaton. Now I know that doesn't look like a huge crazy difference in the track, but it made a humongous difference as far as impacts went. Still a big deal for everybody that was up here, but that was Idalia back in 2023. Another one that really comes to mind, this was probably one of the biggest changes in the forecast, was Hurricane Matthew. This was back in 2016. Initially, this one was forecast to go up the entire East Coast and end up being a big problem for New England. It came up here. The forecast initially kind of looked like this, and it ended up turning out to sea after it went through coastal parts of North Carolina. There was a lot of rain with that storm. I remember a lot of flooding, etc. So there you go. Good questions. We got time for another one or no? All right, let's do it. Thank you, Gina, for the question. Lance in Smith Mountain Lake, Virginia. What factor of a hurricane causes tornadoes? Ooh, I had this graphic ready in case somebody asked. So it will usually happen on the front right quadrant of the storm, okay? You know, basically what happens is you get a lot of moisture that gets pulled into that side of the storm. There's a lot of spin in the air, right front quadrant. So if a storm is making landfall somewhere, you know, whatever that right front quadrant is where you get tornadoes. This is where we saw all the tornadoes that we had with Milton. Let me just do a little bit of a better job of explaining this. Yeah, well, you can see all these tornado warnings that we had with Milton, and actually this map will do for that. So Milton came in here again from the west to the east. I'm trying to remember exactly where Milton made landfall, but it was somewhere up here. And so this, let's draw a circle up here, right? And we'll kind of split it into four. This would be the right front quadrant. This would be the left front quadrant. This would be the right back quadrant. This would be the left back quadrant. Catch my drift on that? I know it tends to be a little bit confusing. But remember, the storm is spinning counterclockwise. So you get just this setup here where, you know, you're getting a lot of moisture flow into here. You've got kind of almost like a frontal-like feature with some of these bandy storms, and you can get some spin in the air, and yeah, we certainly saw that with Milton, no doubt about that. All right, a lot of places have the potential at being affected by Aaron. Great questions, by the way, guys. I really appreciate it. The Virgin Islands, one of those spots that's making some preparations right now, and earlier we talked to a representative from the EMA down in the Virgin Islands. Listen in.
You know, we've been preparing basically for 6 months. No big surprise for us. I think the key right now are our federal partners. We're already talking to the U.S. Coast Guard. Marine conditions are a huge concern for me. Some of my islands are isolated between St. John and St. Thomas and St. Croix. Thank you for the coverage on those islands so far. We're also working with our hurricane hunters. We talked about them already. We look forward to them going out tonight, giving us an 18% more accurate information. And we have our federal partners from FEMA already coming in to support us that we've been exercising in the past. And you mentioned our blue sky sandbags, so I appreciate you bringing that up. We're starting that this morning. We were going to put it off to the right another week, but it's very important that our community gives opportunity to get sandbags, primarily for that wind-driven rain. So my concern is the wind-driven rain, the marine conditions, and of course, the wind overall. But I think those are huge things for us. About 98% of our goods come from outside the territory. So my power plants, I have to get fuel for them. I have to get the support for the airports. I have communications. We just started school yesterday, so obviously the impact for school, for the parents. Governor Bryan and I and a team, we basically are talking to National Weather Service in Puerto Rico every morning at 7 o'clock in the morning, giving the updates. Like you mentioned, it's not turning yet, and that's a concern of mine, because if it doesn't turn yet, it's going to come right on our doorstep as opposed to being north of us. But I appreciate the outreach for us and the communication. And our community is ready. The government, the Virgin Islands, our key agencies, our federal partners, and we do a lot of outreach. Radio stations, I'll be on 5 radio stations this morning. We have a lot of Facebook. I do another government press conference this afternoon. We have got to talk to the community so they know what's coming. A lot of lessons learned from Irma Maria back in 17, but we still want to make sure everybody's aware of that and are prepared. We always talk about being prepared, staying informed, and being vigilant.
And of course, this is kind of like the first brush, and hopefully it's just a nice prep run to get you guys dusted off and ready to go. Obviously, you know, the locals that live in the U.S. Virgin Islands, this is a part of life. But let's be honest, you're also a spot where we have a lot of tourists that come in from the mainland and from other locations. What are you guys doing for the tourists to make sure that they are not caught off guard? Because they might not be paying
We've exercised this. We have ability to mass communicate for Department of Tourism as well as our hotel associations to encourage them to basically start making their moves. A lot of them are still enjoying. Talking to Governor Bryan, if we do a state of emergency, which would be basically an incredible threat, then we'll look at trying to get individuals out, especially from St. John over to St. Thomas. And I think the big thing for us is not having to pay that fee to change your flight. We saw that happen last year when we had our tropical storm NERSCO. We didn't do a state of emergency. So I think part of the trigger mechanism is a state of emergency to make the seriousness of this, but also I think just the communication, and our hotels are great to work with our tourists. Cruise ships will probably be away for a little bit because of the threat, but we love our tourists, but also I want to make sure they're communicating as far as the threats and they take appropriate actions.
Yeah, definitely. And it sounds like you are well prepared and you've been doing a lot of the homework. Daryl, Josh Henn, Director of Virgin Islands Emergency Management, thank you for taking time. I know that you're busy and we'll be keeping the forecast up and going so we can inform people just as you are. So thank you so much.
All right, this is video of a dust storm that happened on Wednesday in Arizona. Monsoon season. It's been kind of on and off so far this year. And yeah, sometimes you get some outflow that comes out in front of some of these storms. And if there's enough dust on the ground, that gust of wind's going to pick it up. Wow, great shot there. I had not seen this one yet, Chris. Nice pick on it. Coming up after the break, we've got a new advisory on Tropical Storm Erin. We'll get to the latest from the Hurricane Center. Stick with us.
Back pain, when you've got it.
Safe Light Repair, Safe Light Replace.
Sometimes things fall right into place, but other times they just fall.
No. What was that?
But at least you can get it fixed now and pay later in 4 interest-free, anytime, anywhere, and do everything you need to get back on the road.
All set. Here you go.
Thank you.
Take care. Get it fixed now and pay later at safelight.com.
Safe Light Repair, Safe Light Replace.
This school, they get independence. You get peace of mind.
I thought life was gonna slow down. Boy, was I wrong.
If you have postmenopausal osteoporosis and are at high risk for fracture, Evenity can help you rapidly build new bone in just 12 months. Evenity is the only bone builder that also helps slow bone loss, and it's proven to significantly reduce spine fracture risk.
She said the Evenity she's taking builds new bone. Builds new bone! So yeah, we still bike, baby.
Or death from a heart problem. Tell your doctor if you have had a heart attack or stroke. Do not report hip, groin, or thigh pain. Unusual thigh bone fractures have occurred with Evenity. Ask your doctor about building new bone with Evenity.
From senior to childcare to pets and more, the new care.com makes it easier than ever to find the care you need. And you don't have to hire just anyone. You can find a background checked caregiver who's the right fit for you. Join now for 20% off care.com.
To show why purple is the greatest sleep ever invented, we've hired Humpty Dumpty.
No! Yes! No cracks!
That's because the Gel Flex Grid is soft where you want it and firm where you need it.
Visit purple.com or a store near you.
So would I just invoice you all?
All new Cops Car Chases.
Stop running, you have nowhere to go.
So buckle up. It's going to be one wild ride.
Put your hands on back.
Cops Car Chases, streaming now.
The concept is fun. It's bikes and coffee. It's going to work. It's going to be great. And then reality, it's all sorts of things you don't really think about when you're starting a business. So having a platform like Gusto to help me run HR and payroll on a single platform was huge. It's intuitive, user-friendly, scalable. Onboarding is like click of a button. I don't have to worry about what taxes are being taken out of the account. I know that payroll's taken care of and they have my back. Bikes and coffee, it just makes sense. Gusto and payroll, kind of the same thing.
All right, we still have Tropical Storm Erin, hot off the press from the National Hurricane Center. The 11 p.m. advisory, 70-mile-per-hour wind, which is really no change in the wind speed since the last advisory, which came out at 8 o'clock. So, yeah, look at that, 998 millibars of pressure. It looks very healthy. I mean, this is clearly a strengthening storm. It's only a matter of time here before we have a hurricane. too. Fantastic. Miguel in Miami. Last time with Irma back in 2017, there was a big change of course, so how can we be confident Erin won't make a landfall in Florida? All right, so a couple of things. First off, forecast modeling has actually got significantly better even since just 2017. I know that sounds crazy, but that was actually 8 years ago. And I would say the model improvements, especially with track forecasts, have gotten just astronomically better. And you know, the other part about Irma specifically, that was a unique situation. There were 2 other storms on either side of it while it was going on. So that's not something you see very often. That's also not the situation that we're dealing with right now. Here's the graphic. I've got it pulled up. So you had Irma here, you had Katia that was in the Western Gulf, and you had Jose, Category 4 storm that was off toward the east of it. So look, what we have right now, it's an overall pretty simple setup compared to this. There's a big area of high pressure sitting over the Atlantic, and it's really just kind of where is the positioning of that going to be, and so where is it going to make the recurve up toward the north. So there's that uncertainty. But this kind of stuff, you put a couple of big storms in here around another storm that you're trying to forecast, throws a lot of kinks in a lot of things, including forecast models. So, you know, I think that's one thing that kind of played into that a little bit. Jessica, good question, by the way, Miguel. I appreciate it. How do you know or predict what storm surge is going to look like due to a hurricane? Ooh, this is a good question. Okay, let me get my map out here. I didn't... North Carolina. How do the hurricane hunters fly safely in a plane in a hurricane? You know, it's funny. I actually would ask this question pretty often too. I'm kind of an aviation geek without a huge amount of knowledge about it. And for the longest time, I always just thought that they flew just above the storm and dropped stuff into it. Now, there is one plane that does that. It's the smaller one. Here, I've actually got the planes here. Hang tight. This little guy, the Gulfstream. The Gulfstream flies way up above the planes, and it'll drop things into it, instruments, so that we can get measurements, etc. So that's the smaller plane. But then you got the big boys. You've got the C-130, a WC-130J. That's a big daddy plane right there, and it can handle a lot. It's built to handle a lot. The other thing is with hurricanes as compared to thunderstorms over land, you know, you always hear about, you know, plane accidents where a plane has flown into a thunderstorm, even if it's a large plane and some kind of downdraft takes it down or something like that. Thunderstorms over land are a little bit of a different beast, right? So in the hurricanes, most of the wind violence is in the horizontal. Yes, there are updrafts in the thunderstorms, and there's some level of downdraft, but it's a little bit different when you've got just a singular supercell thunderstorm sitting out over Oklahoma that's 60,000 feet tall. Violent updrafts, violent downdrafts, and a lot of differently moving air in the vertical, as compared to the hurricane where a lot of it is in the horizontal, and that's one thing that planes tend to handle very well. Now, I've never been in the Hurricane Hunters. I would love to go in one. If anybody's listening, and you can hook me up. But It does get violent in there. I mean, it is definitely a turbulent flight, to say the least, but they do prioritize safety. So hopefully that helps you out a little bit with that. All right, great questions. Again, man, I love my job. This is